Welcome to the Chelsea FC podcast, Gavin Peacock. How's it going?
Going well, thanks, Chris. Good to be with you.
Great. So you first became a member of Glenn Hoddle's squad and you signed for 1.5 million in the 90s. Can you remember how it felt at the time?
Oh, it was quite the thing, really. I'd just been at Newcastle for a few years under Kevin Keegan, captain, and we got promotion to the Premier League. Our son was born that ended that season, and he was born without his right hand, and it was quite a traumatic time for us. And I'd said to Kevin, we really want to get back down south to London where our families are, and as much as we'd loved it at Newcastle. And he said, I don't want you to leave. He said, but I won't outprice you in the market. So he was very kind. And then within about a month, Glenn called me up. And a year before, Glenn had been at Swindon, and he wanted to sign me then, and I wasn't going to leave Newcastle for Swindon with no disrespect. But when he called me up and said, I've just taken over at Chelsea, I'd like to make you my first major signing, I thought that's it. And to play for, I played for one of my childhood heroes in Kevin Keegan. Now to play for Glenn Hoddle, another poster I had on my bedroom wall as a kid, was I just filled me with excitement.
Yeah, and 1.5 million was quite a big transfer fee back then, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think it's 1.25, but still, it was a significant fee. I think Shearer had broken the record at nearly 3 million, and so yeah, there was pressure with that price tag around the neck, and for me coming in there at a time of transition for Chelsea as well, I knew that I had to win the fans over, give them good value for money. And I think, I did that as best I could, and got off to a good start with them. And in fact, I ended up scoring on my debut against Blackburn, but always had a good relationship with the Chelsea fans.
Yeah, you finished joint top goal scorer in that
Mm.
season with 14 goals from midfield. Was that one of your best seasons as a professional footballer?
It was. I mean, I'd scored more at Newcastle, like 22 and then 18. But a few of those games were up front. For Chelsea, I played one or two up front in the early season, but most of it was from midfield. So to do that, and of course, this was in the Premier League. So yeah, that was a really great season. It seemed as well that not only that I got the amount of goals, but they were very important goals. Like they were winners and winning goals in the FA Cup run and stuff like that. So it had one of those. Even if I had a quiet game, Dennis Wisey would say to me, "Hey, you hardly touched the ball all game, and then you ended up getting the winner and the headlines." I said, "Well, Wisey, someone's got to do it."
And what was that 90s dressing room like with Dennis Wise and the likes?
Brilliant, brilliant dressing room. I mean, they'd had some strong characters in that dressing room even the year before with Paul Elliott, Vinnie Jones, Mick Harford. I mean, Kenny Moncur. There were some big men and big characters, and yet we still had the big characters when I was there. The banter flew around, and it was one of those dressing rooms. If you couldn't handle the dressing room banter, if you couldn't handle the stick in the dressing room, you'd not handle the pressure of playing for Chelsea Football Club in front of the fans and the expectation that was upon. So the dressing room, it becomes a testing ground, and you have to be able to kind of laugh at yourself a bit, give a little bit back, and hold your own. But I enjoyed it straight away. Got in there, and I knew one or two players, obviously playing against them. I knew Tony Cascarino, who had been Cass had played for Gillingham when my father was manager of Gillingham. In fact, my father bought Tony Cascarino out of non-league Crocken Hill and gave him his starter at Gillingham Football Club. So from age 15, Cass is a bit older than me, I was going and watching Tony as a raw 19-year-old. And then we were driving partners to when I was at Chelsea to come in together, because we both lived in Kent. So I knew one or two, and it was easy settling in. Wisey was great. Obviously, he was captain. He and I from totally different backgrounds and personalities, but really kind of clicked. Used to partner up in training. Glenn made me vice captain, and I ended up captaining Chelsea. I think it's 40 odd times in my career at Chelsea, which was one of my great honours.
Yeah, and you famously scored both home and away for Chelsea in our 1-0 victories against Manchester United in 1993. What were Manchester United like back then to play against?
Well, they were a great team. I mean, you can name the team. It was that good with Schmeichel in goal and Parker and Bruce and Pallister and Irwin and Keenan Ince in the middle and Chelsea some gigs out wide and Cantona and Hughes. I mean, there you go. That's the team. And it was a formidable team. And yet we just had something over them that season. I mean, Glenn played in the first game at the Bridge, which was earlier on in the season. I got the winner, but Glenn was like a maestro out there, Glenn Hoddle. And I think Cantona famously said afterwards, Glenn Hoddle was like Mozart in a world full of heavy rockers. That was a very appropriate way of describing Glenn as a player, just literally like, classical music out there. And then we went up there in the March, I think it was, after Christmas. Of course, we'd had a dip before Christmas, but we'd gone on the FA Cup run afterwards, so our confidence was building. And Glenn said to me, "You might get one chance in this game here at Old Trafford. If you do, you've got to put it away." And I did get one chance, and I did put it away. We held out, and we did the double. It was just a great feeling against such a great team.
Yeah, and Chelsea was always capable of those results, weren't they?
Yeah, and even if you look at I think the results for Chelsea a few years on after that, we always did well against Man United. It was decent results in general, but yeah, we were capable of pulling off great results. Inconsistent in the league in that first season or so, but a good cup team, hence pulling off the results on the one-off occasions. And what Glenn was trying to do was change a culture on and off the field, and gradually bringing in better and better players. It cannot be underestimated the visionary that Glenn Hoddle was and what he achieved at that club, without probably reaping the great glories that the Mourinho's and the likes reaped down the line. Of course, then they had the money as well then. But Glenn was the catalyst.
Yeah, he built the foundations, didn't he, for later Ruud Gullit and then Gianluca Vialli to win all those cups and trophies.
Absolutely, yeah, that was the foundations. He was the one that got Gullit in. He got Mark Hughes and Petrescu, and all of a sudden we're starting to become a team, and standards went up in training, so that you couldn't cruise through training anymore because you're playing with one or two world-class players there that are not going to have it. I mean, when Gullit joined, a couple of years after I'd been there, one day we came out for training and Marco van Basten was there warming up. Wow. Like, you come over to see Ruud. He was big mates with him, and we're like, what kind of world are we dealing with now? We didn't sign Van Basten, obviously, but it just showed you the level and the standard that was around the place, and that gave everyone a lift and hope, of course, for what could be in the future.
And what was Ruud Gullit like as a player? I mean, I thought he was absolutely fantastic at Chelsea. He was near the end of his career, wasn't he? But what was he like to play with?
He was immense, physically, his consistency of decision making, his vision. He could play anywhere on the field. You could have him a sweeper, centre midfield, right wing, left wing, centre forward. And he was like a man amongst boys. His physical strength, he could hold off two players, no problem. So playing with Ruud it was an education to watch him as well, because like Glenn Hoddle, he always managed to find space. And I think I asked him what, it was Ruud, you always got space, and he would just, what he would do is when the play started to move, sometimes he would just stand still, and we're all tempted to just jog along with the play because then we're keeping next to each other. He would stand still, everyone would move on, and all of a sudden he's got 15 yards of space, and little things like that. It was, even as a player, I was 30 years old, well, 28, 29 years old then, mature player. You're learning, well, there's a difference between a Premier League player, a decent Premier League player, and the world, footballer of the year. So
yeah, and of course at that time Chelsea just started to, and it wasn't really a big thing, was it? Now, of course, there's not many English players, but back then it was the other way around, wasn't it, really? You didn't have many foreign players, and we just started to get them, didn't we, back then?
That's right. We started to bring in the Hullets and the Petrescu's and yeah, not and good foreign players like that. And of course, you know, that helps as well if you're in a European football, because you know they know how to play that well. And what they did is, you know, they teach you to be a little bit more patient. We were a little bit more like, get it forward and let's get up there around the ball. And it was, no, let's play out from the back. Let's control the tempo of the game. Ruud would talk a lot about that. Sometimes that takes a bit of patience if the crowd's wanting you to get that ball in the box, but it can pay great dividends. And when you're playing in Europe, you have to play that way. Another thing that Glenn taught us, you know, in my second season there, we were in the European Cup Winners' Cup. We got to the semi-final, of course, against Real Zaragoza. But he taught us to play in Europe, which was a different ball game.
Yeah, I mean, it must be like going up a level, is it?
It is, yeah, very much so. As I say, you know, the two legs and, you know, away goals, all of this involved, but just the patience that you need. You can't go flying off your shape like you might have been able to do in the Premiership. You had to hold your shape, because if not, they would punish you. But I learned a lot in that. In my second season, I think I played 55 games, because I played in all the European games. But like by the end of that season, that's kind of now with the squad system, you'd be rested and but I was like so tired at the end of that season. But it was a great thing, and such a shame we didn't get to the final against Zaragoza, because the second leg we did really well in.
Yeah, and what was it like playing under a player manager? Because of course these days you don't really get player managers anymore, do you?
No, you don't. That's a good point. Yeah, well, for Glenn, well, as a player manager, obviously you've got to be really good. I mean, Kenny Dalglish did it for a bit, I remember. Glenn was exceptional. He was still the best player on his day in training. Obviously, his legs. He was never fast, so he didn't have any pace to lose. But the skill level was there. He had a great mental strength as well, Glenn. He could handle the pressure. And what he had as well, he had a good assistant in Peter Shreve. Because Peter, you see, had been a manager himself at Tottenham Hotspur. Peter was a great coach. So when we would come in at half time, Glenn needed to get a breather. He's one of the players, right? He needs to get his lungs back. He's getting his drink. Peter could hold a team talk. And then Glenn would pitch in and they'd get together, have a little chat. Glenn might make a decision to bring someone on, or say to Pete, look, if this isn't working, bring whoever it is on after 20 minutes. But Glenn knew it was only for one season that he could do that for. And then he knew he needed to step back off the pitch. And of course, he ended up doing that very thing.
Yeah, and I suppose similar with Ruud Gullit, was it?
Yeah, and Ruud, you know, I remember Ruud he was a bit younger than Glenn, so he had a little bit more left. It was a shame that I was really sad that Glenn left. I was his guy that he signed, and he was bringing in a squad system, so you wouldn't necessarily play your 40 games you wanted. I was of the old school. I just wanted to play every week, but now and again, I had a decent game. I even made a score, and he'd say, I'm resting you for this one. I'm like, I just want to play. But he said it needs to be with the game. The game is moving forward to becoming more of a squad game. And isn't that, again, visionary, how it is much more now in more subs and resting players? He said, if we're going to compete in different tournaments, we need to do that. So I'd have loved Glenn to stay, but obviously when your country calls, it's hard to say no. And Glenn, quite frankly, was made for international football management.
Yeah. And sorry, Gavin, but I have to mention this. You famously hit the crossbar at Wembley in the FA Cup final against Manchester United. Chelsea were playing so well, weren't they? And to be honest, it kind of flattered Man United, didn't it, the 4-0 scoreline?
It did, yeah. I mean, they'll say, well, they scored 4 goals. But I always say that if anyone watches the game, they see in that first half, there was a real contest going on. We possibly had the edge. And everyone, myself included, says if that shot had gone in, if that had been an inch lower, we'd have been 1-0 up again. They'd have thought, is this not our year against Chelsea? You know, and I'd have scored again. You know, even that gets in people's heads. would have given us something to cling on to, it would have been a different story. But of course, it didn't go in. And the second half, well, once we started trying to get the game back, they were the masters of the counter attack. And of course, the second penalty went against us as well. It wasn't a penalty kick.
David Ellery, wasn't
it?
The
clash was outside. David Ellery, and I spoke to him maybe a year or so afterwards. We met at a function. And he said, to be honest, Gavin, if I had to make that decision again, I wouldn't have given the penalty. So there you go. That's a second penalty. That's us really under the cosh. We're now going to chase it, and they hit us in the counter attack. So there was a couple of instances there that went against us, the crossbar and the penalty that really cost us. And then amazing, wasn't it? Was it 3 years later when Di Matteo breaks through in the cup final against Middlesbrough, hits the same crossbar and almost the same position, an inch lower, it goes in. Chelsea win the silverware, and it starts to flow in. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it must be hard to talk about that, but at the same time, I mean, is that one of your biggest, not regrets, but is that sort of, if that would have gone in, it could have been so different, couldn't it, I suppose?
Yeah. In fact, I'm going to show you something. It's a bit of a book plug. Well, it is a book plug as well. But let me just show you something. In my book biography, I wrote my biography a couple of years ago. And that's a Chelsea picture. That's me scoring the first goal in the Luton semi-final game when we won 2-0. But the first chapter I write is actually I bring in people in on the FA Cup final against Manchester United. And the title is Inches. You can see it there. Inches, the fine line between victory and defeat. So an inch lower, and I thought we were going to win. So that's the way it goes in football. And I think that I look back and a shot from 25 yards. It wasn't like I missed a sitter, but I just think
it was a great shot.
So
I mean, it was just.
Yes, it was sweet. Yeah, it was like right foot to left. But I do find myself replaying it in my mind a lot, and each time it hits the crossbar, unfortunately.
And have you still got your medal from that day?
Yeah, well, I actually gave it to my dad, who'd been my sort of greatest coach and influencer. And yeah, I mean, I know there's one or two players that couldn't even, bother with their medals, but for me, even a runners-up medal, it is a place for winners at Wembley. But it still meant something because it was our first cup final for so many years. It was a step forward for Chelsea. It had made so many Chelsea fans year for us to get there. It was heartbreak on the day, but for me, it was still something that was part of us moving forward.
I mean, it must have been so special, that occasion, the atmosphere at Wembley for the cup final.
Oh, and even back then, even more so, every schoolboy's dream to play in an FA Cup final. When I was growing up, that was the thing. Now with the Champions League and all of that, maybe it's lost a little bit of its glamour, though I still think there is something there. But I mean, and the old Wembley, being at the old
Twin
Wembley
Towers.
Stadium. Oh yeah, great stuff. And I played there as an England schoolboy international. So I had been on the turf before. We had the semi-final there, but the final was superb. And I remember the build-up was. Someone said you got to be careful with the build-up because there's so much going on in that week before. Interviews, this, that, appearances here, that it can drain you and drain your energy. The build-up, it takes more out of you than the game itself. So I was a bit conscious to not do too many things. I obviously have to do some interviews and such, so to keep that energy level for the actual day. And I physically felt good on the day myself. Wonderful to get there. And then of course we got into the Cup Winners' Cup the next year, and of course we had an FA Cup run as well. And again, things took another step forward.
Yeah, and you're right about the FA Cup final, because back in the day when it was on the TV, it would be on from the morning, wouldn't it? Right until up to the cup final, and then you'd also have a couple of hours after seeing the celebrations. And now it's just like 20 minutes, isn't it, before the match? And
yeah, no, you're right. Those were the days. I remember as a kid, my dad would, my dad had been a professional footballer, was a professional footballer for Charlton at the time. But end of the season, he's like, his mates would come round, he's sitting there, and I'm a little kid, of course I can't sit still. I mean, whoever's playing, I want to be one of those players, and I'm in the garden kicking the ball about after 25 minutes of the game. But it was a whole day, and a real English tradition, because that FA Cup, it actually has a depth into the non-league teams and such, and it brings out so many great stories along the way, and the focus on smaller teams, and if they get a good draw against a big team, that can mean paying the wages for another year or a new stand or something like that. So there's so many good stories it brings out. There's no domestic cup competition like it in the world.
No, I agree. And what do you think your best goal for Chelsea was?
Oh, best goal for Chelsea. I think my best goal for Chelsea was the quarter-final against Wolves, when I hit the ball on a volley from just coming inside the box, and it was Craig Burley. We won the game 1-0. It was a winner, but it was such an awkward ball to hit. There was a difficult skill. And because of the high tariff, I would go for that one. I loved the second one at Wembley in the Luton semi-final, with a kind of header to John Spencer, the 1-2 touch, and bent it in the bottom corner. That was a picture of a goal. But I think I'd still go for the semi-final, the quarter-final Wolves winner.
Yeah, fantastic goal. And my final question, when and why did you stop playing professional football?
When and why, did you say?
Yeah, was there a reason, or,
Yeah, so I was almost 35. QPR had gone into administration, and I was there obviously at QPR, and was struggling financially. I had a little bit of a knee problem that was just, I could have played another season or two, but with all things combined, I was their top earner. And I thought it was just about the right time to call it a day. In my final season at QPR, Alan Kirbishley had taken me on loan to Charlton in the Premier League, funny enough. And I had 4 months, and he said, if you do all right, he said, I'll sign you. I'll take over your contract at QPR. And for me, that would have been just a dream, because Charlton was the team my dad played for all his career. He was assistant manager to Kirbishley then. It was the Premier League. It was my local club. I got to pull on the red shirt of Charlton a few times, and then I got a calf injury. I pulled a calf muscle. So for most of my 4 months, I was rehabbing that to get back fit. I did, but of course, at almost 35, the board at Charlton probably wouldn't want to sign me. They wanted to probably see that I'd be fit for a bit longer. The end of the season came. I went back to QPR. The end of the season came, and I just decided this is the right time to call it a day. I wanted to finish when I was still playing at a decent level. I wasn't kind of going out there and letting people down and all of that. So I did. It was sad, because QPR was the club I started at, and QPR was the club I finished at. So I walked into that club as a 15-year-old, and I left as almost a 35-year-old. And you realise when you drive away from that training ground, you look back and everything carries on. Thud of the boot against the leather and the banter of the lads, and you've just been one player in a line of many players. Now you're a retired footballer. And so that was the time. It was 2002. And of course, a year later, I had my testimonial match against Chelsea at Loftus Road. So I'd been 10 years at QPR, and they granted me a testimonial. I saw Ken Bates at a Chelsea match, and I asked him, would you play me? And he said, yeah, I'll send the team down at the end of the season. And he sent everyone. It was Zola's last appearance in a Chelsea shirt as well. Yeah, they came, they brought everyone, Lampard and all of them. And I had a little all-star QPR team made up of, ex-player Ray Wilkins played, Glenn played. We got battered because it was a proper Chelsea team. I got these retired players in my team, but it it was a good day. And just as a nice touch, I'd asked Franco Zola for his shirt at the end to be signed and sign it to my son Jake, knowing it would be the last shirt that he wore for Chelsea. And the end of the game came, and I was busy with stuff. But then I thought, they'll have gone now, the Chelsea team, and Franco's forgotten. And then the kit man came back in. And he said, "Oh, it was folded up." Franco said, "That's for you, and it's best wishes to Jake, Gianfranco Zola," which was said something about a Chelsea legend that was Zola on the field, but also off the field, and a nice finishing touch to my career, even in terms of playing against Chelsea in my testimonial match.
Yeah, a gentleman, isn't he, Gianfranco? I've met him before.
Yeah.
Really nice guy.
True gent, yeah.
And you mentioned Ken Bates. He's actually going to be my next podcast. I'm going to meet Ken, and we're going to do a bit of an interview. So looking forward to that.
Pass on my regards to Mr. Bates, or Batesy, as well. Wisey was we would have said Mr. Chairman, would be respectful, but Wisey was the only one to call him Batesy and get away with it.
Says everything about Dennis Wise, really, doesn't it?
It says everything about Wisey. But what a great captain and player Wisey was for Chelsea.
Legend, yeah. Much like yourself. Thanks a lot for joining us, Gavin. Thanks for the memories.
Yeah, my pleasure, Chris.